Hello, everybody. Today I'm back. Yesterday, Charles replaced me
Oh,
and
yes,
did
we
a,
missed you.
and did a wonderful job. You
He
know,
did. He
thank
did.
you. Yeah, he did. I saw the record later. So thank you, Charles.
You're welcome. We will try
Yeah,
to do the best. Huh?
good. So, and today we do have a special guest. Our friend here is Humberto Schubert. He's from Brazil, city of Juiz de Fora. And Humberto is member of the Primavera Society, is a spiritist house or center in Juiz de Fora. He's also he teaches philosophy, is a lecturer in philosophy in the University of Juiz de Fora. He wrote many articles, academic articles, and spiritist articles as well, and books. And today specifically, we are to talk about his new book, The Science of Life After Death. The Science of Life After Death, which is our topic today as well. So this book is not launched yet, but we will be launching beginning of June. And if you have any comments or you are interested, please go to Springer Publisher and you can reserve the book. And by the way, the book is in English. That's the wonderful news. Thank you, Humberto.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you. So, as usual, let's start with our introductions. I already introduced Humberto. Let's go to ladies first. Miss Gibbons, how's UK?
Hello. It's was warm today, but we're expecting rain, at least here in Wandsworth. And everything is well. It's nice to be again here. Very, very special to be here again today, and especially with a guest, Humberto. And nice to see Charles and you. Nice to have you back as well. And sending our love to everyone that is listening to us and sharing this moment, and asking God to bless each and every one of us and our whole planet with peace. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, my dear. Bonsoir, Charles.
Bonsoir Stevan, bonsoir à tous. Très heureux d'être parmi vous à nouveau ce soir avec notre invité spécial, Humberto Schubert, et aussi le retour de Stevan qui nous a manqué. Et merci à tous ceux qui sont là pour assister à cette présentation qui sera faite justement sur ce thème complexe de la science par rapport au monde invisible, qui, malgré toutes les prévisions qui ont été faites, ça met du temps à venir. Il y a beaucoup de résistance et ma foi, petit à petit, on va finir par y arriver. Hello everyone, sorry for having maybe spoken a little bit too much in French. Very happy to be here again with you. Welcome back, Steven. Also welcoming our dear friend Humberto Schubert to treat this subject concerning the science approach of this spiritualist phenomenon. It's so long that we are talking about this theme, but still there is quite some resistance in the scientific means. But slowly but surely it's coming. I even can show you one book. It's not in English, it's in French. But there are more and more now people, very well-known scientists, who are really frankly and surely entering in this domain, showing even by the scientific methods that the scientific investigation on this paranormal phenomenon are sometimes much more advanced in terms of validity than some scientific speculation which are valid in the mainstream. So welcome everyone, welcome Humberto, and eager to listen to you.
Thank you, Charles. And Humberto, you already have a request here. Our friend Leah from Sweden. Any chance for Kindle? Thank you. So, talk to Springer.
Yeah,
looking Kindle.
It is very likely to happen because it's a powerful printing house, a powerful publisher. In the academic domain, I believe it is the biggest or the largest publisher in the world. So from what I remember, I think they had plans for the physical format and for the ebook, but I'm not quite sure that the Kindle version is included, but very likely. I believe they will launch the book in about 20 days or a month already in the multimedia format.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, buonanotte, Nancy. Good to have you here, my dear. And as usual, let me put a video. And this video, Silvia, I ask help from our friend, Dr. Peter Fenwick. So let's see what he can add to us tonight in terms of introducing for us the topic today.
We cannot hear Stevan.
I cannot see. One second. Let me see what I did wrong here. Let me see. It's my fault. I know what I did wrong here. I didn't share. I didn't share my audio. Okay. Like my daughter says, sharing is not caring. You know? So let me share my audio and so I care about you guys.
At the time of death, there was something called deathbed coincidences. In these, the dying person, at the moment of death, because we've got data to support that, goes and visits somebody to whom they're emotionally connected. They have to be emotionally connected. And they give them a message. And the message, the way they give the message, depends on how the person who's receiving the message are. If you're awake, then you tend to feel the person's presence. You feel something awful may have happened to them. You have to contact them and find out what's going on. They very seldom give a message then. But if you're asleep, then you get a narrative dream. You're told a story. You're visited by the dying people, and they will say, I'm okay. Please don't worry about me. It's all right. And then they leave. So these are very, very reassuring to the family and the relatives. And then at the time of death and just after death, there are a lot of things which happen. People see light in the room over the time that you're dying. Other people see things leaving the body. Other people experience the fact that their clocks may have stopped at the time of death. So there are lots of things that many of them are quite non-local. Animals are very common in the dying phase, and birds particularly. We've got a lot of stories of birds that seem to be carrying the people who the relatives feel, carrying the spirit of the dying person. Some people in the stories we have associate this going process with a change in temperature in the room, and sometimes with a feeling that something has left. And then that seems to be the end of the dying process. So there are lots of exciting things.
Okay, our brilliant Dr. Peter Fenwick, always giving wonderful insights. And Leia, I will write down the title of the book and for you, okay? So, Humberto, if you want to go through your explanation, usually, guys, we allow our guests to give a introduction of the team, and then we will open to questions. We will have a conversation about the topic. Okay. So,
Okay.
Humberto, friends, feel free.
Well, the title of the book is Science of Life After Death. And as Dr. Fenwick just showed very competently, we can hardly start better than with someone such as Dr. Peter Fenwick, because he's really a paragon of the scientific approach to this subject. For a very long time, we had a confusion on this and related topics because they were kind of kidnapped by the religious narratives. And contrary to many academics, I have nothing against religion. I also am very interested in religion. It is one of my main topics in life, in the academic research. But we have to distinguish the religious approach, the religious concepts and narratives from the scientific and the philosophical ones. And this is precisely what we wanted to do in this book. I, a philosopher, and two psychiatrists, Doctors Mariana Costa and Alexander Moreira Almeida, we wanted to present the data, the available evidence, the scientific evidence, and the main philosophical arguments regarding this evidence about the concept of a survival of the personality or consciousness after bodily death. So it is not a revolutionary approach and not something extremely new. We have a bunch of authors and relatively big mass of books written about that. But I think we could innovate in some key interesting aspects. For example, we gave the data and the evidence a sort of new format compared to other previous approaches, which were centered on one single evidence and try to emphasize the strength of one type of evidence. It started this new conception from a very long discussion we had when preparing the book. The book was meant to be written to a competition, for a competition of essays on the best evidence on the survival of the soul after bodily death. So while planning this book, we had very, very long conversations for months about what would be the silver bullet evidence against the disbelief and the pseudo-skepticism against this evidence, which are actually quite large. There is lots of evidence from different types. And after a very long conversation, I remember my friend, Dr. Alexander Moreira, calling me and asking me repeatedly, so Humberto, what in your opinion would be the best evidence? And I remember to have a philosophical problem with that question, And I said, well, I don't believe we have one single decisive evidence in science, in no science at all. On the contrary, we change our mind. We are persuaded by the mass and the accumulation of good and consistent evidence on a subject in favor of some sort of explanation and theory about the specific phenomena we are studying. So maybe instead of looking for one single exemplar evidence, we could have a more philosophical approach, more culturally oriented, and question why people do reject or still reject a very large number of interesting and compelling evidence in favor of the idea of survival. So that turned out to be the central question of the book.
Okay. Well, thank you, my friend. And what inspiration you had to write the book? It's came from a lot of questions you have received, or you saw a gap in terms of the market in order to fulfill this gap. So what motivated you to write the book?
Well, I would answer positively to your questions, but the main reason or the main source of motivation was the fact that we were researching that for many years. So I started my academic life studying the concepts of God and the concept of immortality of the soul, which are core philosophical concepts, strong related to very strongly related to religion. So I was always interested in that. I think Mariana and Alexander were also always interested in that philosophical questions about the survival of the soul to bodily death. And they have been studying, as I myself as well, the issue from different perspectives and with different emphasis for pretty much all our academic lives. And when opportunity presented itself, we kind of realized that we had to synthesize and organize all that data and the arguments in a single coherent piece of work that could present for the lay public the best available evidence provided by psychological and medical sciences mostly, and the strongest philosophical arguments on the evidence itself and also about the issue itself.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'd like to ask you something, if I may. You said that in the book you have a more, I'm looking forward to reading it actually, and if it's in Kindle, it'll be fantastic. You said you took a more philosophical approach to the subject, and we know this is so embedded with religion and skepticism, so it is in a way it's a difficult subject. And on the other hand, it's the most certainty that we as human beings have, because it doesn't matter who we are, that's the journey. We will go through the journey. So when you say, can you give an example, for instance, how you dealt with it philosophically, please? Thank you.
Yeah, it was great to have a team with different abilities and skills, because we managed to tackle the issue from quite different perspectives. For example, I worked mostly with philosophical and historical arguments and perspectives on the idea of immortality, trying to show that it is pretty universal and perennial. In the most irreligious culture of all times, we still have about 80 to 85% of humanity believing in the immortality of the soul, in the survival of the soul after bodily death. Now, the numbers are worse in Europe and North America, but they are pretty high almost everywhere in the planet. So this is a brute fact of society, or a brute fact about humanity, is that people tend to believe that they are immortal, that they can survive death, or that they have a part in them, in their consciousness or whatever, that survives death. And what is more important, even more important, people believe that this belief is not random or unjustified. Most people strongly believe that this conviction or this belief comes from facts and from compelling evidence or intuition, or some sort of immediate knowledge about reality. So people are usually not ready to admit that this is an opinion like other opinions, but they feel in the depth of their consciousness or of their minds, or they have a sentiment, an intuition, or even empirical evidence for this belief, in favor of this belief. So this is already a possible empirical evidence in favor of the survival of the soul, because if pretty much everyone, everywhere, in all times, believed that this is a fact of nature, there must be some reason for this core belief of humanity, which is not cultural, and it's not bound to time and to religion. In fact, irreligious societies, such as nowadays the Chinese society, they do not show a smaller conviction or a weaker belief in the idea of immortality of the soul, while half of the Chinese do not believe in God, for example, and more than half, the majority, do not have a religion. They are the most irreligious country in the world, also to some extent enforced by the state. At the same time, about 80% of the population still believe in reincarnation or the immortality of the soul. So this seems to be a very resilient concept across cultures and times and ages, and pretty much in every context. On the other hand, we have philosophical arguments, proper philosophical arguments, from Plato on throughout the history of philosophy, to to our times, in the 20th or the 21st century, we still have powerful arguments from philosophers trying to define or justify the belief in the survival of consciousness, personality, or the soul to bodily death. And these arguments are usually not related to religions. They have sometimes nothing to do with religion at all. And that's also suggestive that reason, despite all the evidence, the empirical evidence that we are dealing with in the book, reason alone has some sort of tendency to acknowledge the relevance of the subject and even to find compelling arguments and persuasive arguments in favor of that belief. Now, my colleagues, the empirical scientists, of course, they did not deal much with the philosophical aspect of the matter, but they collected a significant amount of evidence of 3 different types that is suggestive of the survival of the soul or the personality. The first kind of evidence is mediumship, the possibility of a direct contact with a deceased soul. And there seems to be interesting evidence in favor of this theory, of this hypothesis. The second type is formed by the conjunction of near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences. And it is probably the most powerful evidence that we have because it's pretty much non-cultural, happens everywhere in pretty much all hospitals in the world where resurrections, medical resurrection does occur. And it is pretty compelling because you have a very controlled environment, different from a seance or the narrative of a medium. We have a very controlled environment in the chirurgic room, for example. The third kind of evidence is formed by the alleged memories of past lives by children, specifically by children, because as in the case of the controlled chirurgic room of near-death experiences, the alleged memories of past lives in children, they're easier to control for fraud or compulsive lying or other possible sources of misinformation. So when we see the 3 sources together, considering that they are not connected to each other, they are really 3 completely different types of phenomena, and all of them can only be explained by the survival of consciousness and personality to bodily death. The sum of this mass of evidence is quite strong. This is very persuasive.
When you said the 8%, how much do you think the fact that there is still very strong religious conviction of eternal punishment, and not only within the Catholic Church, but many other religions, that they accept the idea that you're going to die and you're going to be punished forever? How much do you think this affect the fact that some people say, oh, I don't believe in it because they don't want you to go through, I think that playwright Beckett, he said, you can take the man out of the Catholic Church, but you can't take the Catholic Church out of the man, you know. And he had a debate on death and after death, or what happened to him. And I think this is very much, how much do you think this affects this?
Yeah.
If you could say something about that.
That's a quite interesting question too. I think we, as a historian of religion, I think we have a tendency to be judgmental or to have some prejudices against the idea of reward and punishment. But it is also a very universal idea, happens pretty much everywhere in all cultures. And most cultures acknowledge that as a fact, not as a dogma, not as a random belief added to the cultural environment by someone. So from Zoroaster or Zarathustra to Confucius and from India, the idea of karma to the African philosophical and religious ideas on some cause and effect mechanism in nature, we can see that the notion of reward and punishment is pretty strong and does not seem to be dependent on culture. On the contrary, as the idea of reincarnation, as the idea of mediumship and the idea of a supreme creator, supreme intelligence of the world, these seem to be very fundamental ideas that occur to all intelligent beings as long as they start to reflect on the consequences of their moral lives. So as a historian of religion or a scientist of religion, I try to understand this phenomena from that perspective. But yes, there is also, as you put it, an obvious growth of disbelief in the immortality of the soul or the survival of the soul, based on the cultural rejection to religions in the West specifically. Also a little bit in other cultures, in non-Western cultures, as long as they are westernized or influenced by the Marxist ideologies and Marxist approach to materialism and the Marxist presentation of materialist ideologies and philosophies. Well, that said, it is also challenging to understand why a society such as the Chinese society or the Japanese society, where people do not have religions and do not care much about religious dogmas, or you don't see strong organized religious institutions in China or in Japan. They are pretty much separated, independent or almost individual temples that depend on the local community and so on and so on. So in these societies, contrary to our expectations, the belief in an immortal life or in an afterlife did not diminish. On the contrary, they seem to be more or less equal to cultures that are strongly religious oriented, or where religions are strongly institutionalized.
Humberto, yes, so I have you talked about 80% of the people believing that the life continues after death, average in the world, correct? I think in the Western countries, it's something like 50 or maybe a little bit more than 50. So it's already more than half. Huh? Mm-hmm. But I have a kind of a feeling that when we go to the scientist groups or doctors or others, that is exactly where we see the biggest resistance to this type of ideas, like a kind of a fear. So I think that the time where Giordano Bruno has been burned and Galileo Galilei was threatened because he was saying that it is Earth turning around the sun and not the opposite, this time are gone. And I think since the 18th or 19th century, the science has really won a strong position that at the beginning was quite anti-clerical, even sometimes, rejecting and fighting against the religions. This time seems now have gone. What is in your opinion? What is today the biggest resistance of these intellectual elites against whatever is notions of God or spiritual life or survival after death?
This is one of the central questions of our book. And spoiler alert, the conclusion of the book is that the main resistances against the idea are not scientific, but cultural. So in general, we have a cultural prejudice from the medias, not so much from the scientists. That's very shocking when you see the data. In some regions, in some environments, the belief of an afterlife among scientists or in academic community is significantly bigger than in general society. That is in university. Sometimes you will find more people that believe in afterlife than in the general society of that city or that country outside the university. But there is a very strong resistance in the media, in journalists and writers of popular science and of popularized presentations of science, such as, for example, the very famous Richard Dawkins, who is not technically a scientist. He doesn't publish scientific papers for about 40 years, since the 80s, the decade of the 80s. But he's a pretty strong name in all bookstores around the world, a main name related to the scientific opposition to the ideas of God and immortality of the soul and so on. So we identified in our analysis that there is, to some extent, a lack of proper scientific opposition to the subject. We have very few good scientific books showing that there is no such thing as a spirit or as an afterlife. These books are very, very rare, while the books that have arguments in favor of the reality of the spirit and an afterlife are quite common. There is numerous books on that, from physicians, from natural scientists, from philosophers, obviously also from theologians, and many sorts of academics from many specialties. Also philosophically, there are not very powerful arguments against the idea of immortality of the soul. Most of the arguments, they tend to be very dogmatic, and they just assert out of nothing that materialism won, and if you are rational, you have to be materialist. and you cannot believe in such things as God and the spirit. You're just prohibited to hold such beliefs because they are irrational. They are in contradiction to materialism. But they usually fail to understand that materialism is not a scientific position, but a purely philosophical position. Materialism and spiritualism are philosophical interpretations of reality. They have nothing to do with the facts and nothing to do with science proper.
I think one of the things you said, I mean, Richard Dawkins, he's a biologist, isn't it? And his books and his interviews, it's interesting that he goes to those most, I'm sorry to say this, but most backward churches where the God that these people believe, I don't believe, and I'm a fervent believer in God, but I couldn't possibly, in any reason, accept that kind of God. So his representation, I think the point you made is really good, because his representation of religion and of the people who believe in religion is extremely backward in a way. Some people who have some kind of cults rather than having a religion that brings your soul to light, makes you feel happy with life, and I think that's one of the things, and I find that, as you said, the philosophy of it all is just interpretations, and they use the most basic beliefs to affirm. And that's why part of the books, when you read it, it's empty, isn't it? Because they are talking about religion and how people believe in it, rather than really thinking about what God is and what God represents. And in this, we are very lucky with Spiritism, because our first question in the Spirit's book is, what is God? And from then on, everything is light, isn't it? And I find that's the lack of, as you said, this lack of saying something comes from this fact that they go to something that no one can accept, really. What do you think?
Well, perfectly remarked. the great observation. When you pick the weakest opponent, your victory is not that glorious. And if you take the most childish and as I said, backwards and primitive arguments, and most dogmatic, the least critical and the least scientific and the least rational depictions of religious ideas, it is very easy to eliminate them and to show them as weak, because they are weak. So if you're honest, you have to start by attacking the greatest minds of all time, such as Leibniz and Kant and Hegel, who are religious people. And you have to show them as incompetence, which is pretty hard to do. So we could do the same. We could point to Richard Dawkins and prove that what he's saying about religion is positively wrong. But we wanted to be charitable with our adversaries and to take the very best of the materialists and atheist philosophers and scientists, such as David Hume, for example, and try to analyze the best available arguments against the idea of an afterlife, to see to which extent these arguments were valid. And this should be the ideal behavior in science and philosophy, in any rigorous activity. We have to charitably take the best of our opponents and not the worst sides and the worst arguments they present, and disprove or first to understand and then to disprove the best that they offered to us.
Humberto, we do have a question here from Guilherme Dias. Chinese and Japanese aren't much into religion, but are they more spiritualized than the Western world?
Well, that's a great question, because it remembers us that religion and spirituality are not necessarily the same thing. You can be a non-religious person and really have no religion at all, and be also highly spiritualized in pretty much all the relevant senses. And at the same time, it is possible that you have a religion and you follow that religion scrupulously, with much care for it, and you're not very spiritualized, or you don't have the intrinsic religiosity that should follow from that religious practice. That happens quite frequently because people have a more social and cultural understanding of the value of religion, and they do not translate the symbols that religion offers to the more practical and existential parts of life that are to which they are oriented. Actually, the symbols, they do not exist for their own sake, and they have no intrinsic value in themselves, but they have value to the extent that they can provide meaningful life or change our behavior positively. So yes, obviously everyone, different folks and people can be very spiritualized without a religion.
May I ask another question?
Go ahead.
Sorry. There is another question, and I can ask afterwards. Can I ask a question, or I can wait for somebody else to ask another question?
No, go ahead, my dear. Go ahead.
Thank you. Did you? How much did you put in the book about the process of death itself? I ask this because I worked as a therapist. I'm a past life therapist, and I have worked with many people that we only dealt actually with the death itself and just afterwards, because they were part of culture that death was something very important, to follow a lot of rituals and things to release their soul. And in many ways, I've worked actually with people that I release their soul from the body and a lot of things. And in situations even in which the way they died had affected their lives in the here and now. And it changed. Once we've done that, it changed. So how much did you put about the process of death in the book?
Yeah, unfortunately, little, because the book was meant to be an essay of about 100 pages, which is very short for this huge subject. So we have to be very selective. And our purpose in the book was to present the strongest possible evidence for an afterlife, for the hypothesis of the survival of the soul. So we ignore all other sorts of evidence, but this three, which we judged that could provide the best evidence to persuade someone who do not believe in an afterlife, but would be open to hear what the scientific data could tell about that. So it's really not a book for the religious persons who are completely persuaded that an afterlife exists, and it is not for the dogmatic not skeptical, dogmatic materialist that rejects the possibility of an afterlife, but it was meant to everyone who is somewhere in the middle of these strong dogmatic positions and is open to hear what scientific.
So it's an opening of the subject for discussion in a way.
Yes.
Because
yes,
did you put a part that you can return, can write back? Because it would be wonderful if you could continue with the debate, with all the data that will come, because it's an extremely important, because there is not only that we believe in God, but believe that life goes on, and also that we reincarnate, which is very, very special, because I feel personally the day that most of the people on this planet accept that we reincarnate, life will be very different. If you know we're going to live the consequence of whatever you're doing now, things will change radically in way people behave in certain ways. So it's a wonderful subject that you open up for discussion. And let's study your book and do some workshops and talk about it.
Yeah, that would be great. And another very important observation of yours is that the aspect of reincarnation is usually ignored in such research, because there is not only the prejudice from the part of materialism and materialist researchers, but there is also a lot of prejudice from religious persons against the idea of reincarnation, and also the idea of mediumship, of a possible contact with the deceased. And in the books and in the articles we analyze, we notice that there is a sort of tendency to reject some sorts of evidence based on religious previous understandings of what is possible and what is not. And obviously that's an obstacle to a purely scientific and purely rational approach to the subject, because we have to see what the data is telling, and not judge the data according to our previous conceptions based on religious belief only. So I think this is a difficult frontier to cross nowadays, because there is a resistance from religious communities that in past times we did not acknowledge very well, and we depicted the obstacles against the idea of an afterlife as purely based on materialism, which is a false assumption. It is not. It does not respond to reality. So we have to create a new mentality about the subject, about the matter, in order to promote the impartial analysis and the rational analysis of the issue, and to avoid the prejudice from materialists, but also from religious perspectives. And that's very important. On the other hand, we have scientists and philosophers who analyze all the available evidence that we have nowadays and conclude that the evidence for reincarnation is stronger, in fact, stronger than all other sorts of evidence. So we have at least one philosopher, Robert Almeida, an American philosopher, who was a materialist and an atheist. And after analyzing Jan Stevenson's cases of possible evidence for past life, possible memories of past lives in children, concluded that, well, this facts and this evidence proves that reincarnation is a fact of nature. It is a law of nature, and whoever disbelieves reincarnation is irrational. So this is a very strong sentence, a very, very strong conclusion.
It almost feels the religious people are more against reincarnation than the others, I think, because they have some ideas. I find it that you can talk to someone about reincarnation in a more open way than with but someone who's very religious. If they don't accept it, they will not accept it. And I think in this point we are also very lacking in Spiritism, because Kardec took it out of the religious part, and have a philosophical and a scientific way of looking into reincarnation, which is and the book of Dr. Stevens is 20K suggestive of reincarnation, the work of Dr. Banerjee as well, and of course her own book in Brazil, but forgot his name. Do you remember his name?
Hernani Guimarães Andrade.
Hernani Guimarães, which is a scientific book on reincarnation. So it's, there will be many parts for your book, and we're looking forward to it already.
Humberto, building on a little bit on this subject, did you also analyze in your book comparing these three categories of facts that you mentioned, mediumship, memory of past life, and near-death experiences, to compare with scientific methodology? Because I think, of course, it is not experimentable like physics or chemistry or whatever. There is also no model yet, but there are theories, and it can be compared with the real. So this should be considered scientifically as valid, isn't it? Because there is a lot of scientific theories which are considered valid, like the evolution of the space, of the species, how the life appeared on the world, and what happened after the Big Bang, and things like this, which are also not experimentable and modelizable always. So did you compare these three categories of facts with some others which are paradoxally universally admitted by the scientific community?
Yes, that's also a great point, because we did it very briefly because of the lack of space, but we did compare all the sorts of evidence with similar evidence in other sciences that are regarded as respectful or substantial evidence, and that emphasize the conclusion that the problem with this evidence is not that the evidence is weak, and it is not that the evidence is peculiar or exotic compared to other branches of science, because here and there we have very rare facts that we cannot predict, and we have to rely on these very rare occasions when the fact presents itself. We also have psychological facts that are dependent on subjective perspectives, but nonetheless, this evidence are considered as reliable and respectful, and usually are considered enough to sustain a scientific conclusion and a scientific theory. So why does it not happen with the idea of an afterlife? So our conclusion says, because this idea is identified as mystical or religious, and therefore, according to materialist metaphysics, to materialist philosophy, it cannot be true. It is irrelevant what the facts say or what the evidence tell us, but these facts cannot be correct. So most so-called skeptics, which are in fact not skeptics, because a skepticist is a doubter, is someone who is always questioning and has doubts about everything. But the opponents of the idea of an afterlife are usually quite dogmatic and quite attached to a materialist perspective and dogma, and they reject a priori the evidence almost without seeing it or almost without analyzing it. We collected some evidence that this is the case, like editorial notes or articles that explicitly say this can never happen, and if it happens, we should ignore it because there is something wrong in our observation. So this is unscientific, exactly, or actually anti-scientific.
Mm-hmm.
Great. And Humberto, Gabriel Inácio is asking if your plan part 2 of the book.
Well, not yet. A book is usually a very exhausting accomplishment. So when we finish one big piece of work with all the additional challenges of writing in a foreign language and so on, even with help of revision and so we reach the end of the process pretty tired, pretty exhausted, and it may happen in the future, yes, but now speaking only for myself, I would love to rest a little bit.
Okay, good. And the last comment here, Thais Gimbernal said Nietzsche can be compared also, I believe.
Yeah. In my formation, I studied mostly philosophy of religion and metaphysics of the ideas of God and afterlife, and history of religion. So from that basic formation, I had a very close contact with Nietzsche. An interesting fact is that if you studied theology in Germany, as I did for a year, you will certainly have at least one discipline entirely dedicated to Nietzsche's criticism on religion. So I followed this discipline in Halle, the Martin Luther Universität Halle, and that was quite enriching for my understanding of the importance of Nietzsche's social criticism, I could say, or cultural criticism on religion. The first thing I would acknowledge is that Nietzsche is not a metaphysician, so he's not criticizing the concepts of God or immortality in themselves.
But the religion.
Yeah, it is. He's a critic of Western culture and religion as an institution in the Western culture. So considering that, his criticism on Christian culture is pretty effective, and it is true to a great extent, in the sense that this Christian culture produced all sorts of ethically questionable phenomena along its history.
It's very interesting that you said, because I agree with his opinion. He criticized the church and the way it was taught and the way how people, and I mean, it's still the same, isn't it? We have the same feelings, how sometimes someone who says, especially people who, when you mention that people were extremely religious and they followed it, but they are not spiritualized. And I think that those are the kind of people that Nietzsche criticized, because his books are quite religious. They are quite feeling, and that God is good. I think, but he's being representing wrongly, I think.
Another interesting author, Dostoevsky.
Oh yeah,
is also very difficult to analyze and to categorize. Is he anti-religious? Is he a religious author, a Christian author? So we have many possible perspectives. Recent research showed that Dostoevsky was a reader of Allan Kardec, and he was quite interested in the Kardec's approach to religious idea, which was purely philosophical and a scientific approach to the religious ideas. I would say that Allan Kardec is a nice model, is a very good model for what we try to do in the book, in the sense that we can enforce or change religious concepts, but not dealing primarily with them. On the contrary, we try to come and to start from a scientific and philosophical perspective that would be purely rational, and through that perspective emphasize concepts that are traditionally regarded as religious concepts, but they may not be necessarily religious, and it is possible to question the relation between these concepts and religion at all. So I think many authors that are critical to religious culture, or to Western culture, or Christian culture more specifically, would profit much from a more dispassionate approach and from a more dispassionate perspective on these concepts, if they would consider them from a purely philosophical perspective. Maybe they wouldn't seem problematic, or as problematic as from a more religious perspective.
Yeah. Okay, my friends, it's already almost 10 minutes past our time. When the talk is good, we don't feel the time is over. So thank you, Humberto. It was amazing to have you here. And I wish you the best of luck with the book. We can wait to read it. And thank you for your efforts in doing this in English. Please concentrate your efforts more in English, in material in English. If you have in French as well, I will not complain, but English is a good start.
Yeah, give me only one more incarnation and I will do that.
Okay, Charles, you are in control of it, okay?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But don't say this, Humberto. You are still young.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to our announcements. There are very few here. So next week, the topic is the intervention of spirits in the corporeal world, and our friend Nadja Gircis will stay with us. So next Wednesday, 25th of May at 9 p.m. Also, on the 26th of May, the following Thursday, Guilherme Dias will give a talk in Spiritist Society of London, and the topic is Spiritism, a Body of Knowledge. The venue, it's here in the Quakers Meeting House, so please just join Guilherme in this wonderful talk. I'm pretty sure it's going to be good. And our free course, Introduction to Spiritism, led by Vanessa Ferreira, it's almost done. So please join every Wednesday from 7 to 8 p.m. London time. The Zoom room, it's here on your screen. Also, our run rate shows, Coffee Break with Kardec every Wednesday, 4 p.m. Every Saturday, 10:30 a.m., we have the online course about the Medium's book. Every other Tuesday, we do have conversations on mediumship on the show Time to Talk with Guilherme Dias Rafael Caldas. And last but not least, every other Tuesday, we do have the study of the book Nosso Lar. So all these events are online. Okay? That's it for today. I want you to say thank you, everyone, and I'll see you next Wednesday. I wish you the best of night, best of the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Merci. Au revoir.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.